You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm at one of our offices with the Executive Headteacher and Executive Deputy-Head of the Outdoors School, Robyn Vincent and Jonathan Breeze. We're here to talk about how we support the young people we work with when it comes to issues surrounding gender. In particular, we'll be looking at empowering girls and promoting gender equality and discussing the concept of toxic masculinity and how we can approach these big issues whilst in the woods with our learners. It's going to be an interesting one today, so thanks to you, both of you, for joining me.
No problem.
I almost stumbled over all of that. I found thinking about how to dive into this episode a bit tricky, but decided that maybe it's best to talk about the current environment. So we're looking at, let's start with girls, looking at girls and young women. In your guys' experience, what sort of problems and challenges are they currently facing?
Well, we thought it was worth just really defining what we mean by toxic masculinity, because it's a phrase that's being thrown around and everybody's using it. Nobody's really clear. So we're thinking of it as harmful behaviour and attitudes that are often associated with traditional norms of masculinity, like aggression, dominance, emotional repression. And we talked about the fact that it's almost become shameful to be a masculine man, almost criminalised. But what we also thought was really important was that we acknowledged the presence of toxic femininity as well. In that there is a kind of man-hating culture out there, just in the same way. So when we talk about toxic masculinity, we're talking about this shame that's being associated around things that are stereotypically associated with male behaviour. And John and I had a conversation, and I'm speaking for you, John, but about how John really wanted to tackle this idea in public forums, but really felt quite unsafe to do so. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, absolutely. I think you very rarely see anything about being a positive male role model from men. Women are very good at positive conversations and leading that vision. But I think what I've seen with toxic masculinity is the real narrowing of the definition of what masculinity means, because it almost is, I think when I used to hear toxic masculinity, I used to hear masculinity is toxic. And that's, I think, true of a lot of men.
Yeah. And
that's not what toxic masculinity is about. But we have to acknowledge that sometimes we hear that in the wrong way. And masculinity is actually a positive strength if used in the right way. And I think talking about positive masculinity or masculinity on its own anywhere, we had a long conversation about I wanted to do stuff on social media promoting it, but almost overtly had to put in I'm anti-Andrew Tate to make sure I wasn't let's do manly stuff positively.
Yeah.
And people go, oh, you're an Andrew Tate fan, because we're certainly not. But I think the reason Andrew Tate has a foot on the platform is because men like me have kept quiet too long.
Yeah.
And, my role in all schools I've ever worked at has been very fatherly, masculine, and, I've kind of just the nature of who I am. But actually what I think toxic masculinity has created is that masculinity is toxic, and by doing that what we've done is we've seen a rise in isolation of men not really knowing how to be men and what is a man's role in society anymore, because we definitely know what it isn't, but actually they haven't always been upskilled or given the tools to know what that means for them. And masculinity is a good thing in the same way feminism is a good thing, but when it becomes toxic, that's when it becomes extreme. And certainly more recently I have been more pro-positive masculinity, and I was saying I went on a men's retreat only the other weekend to Buckfast Abbey, and it was great, but it wasn't a lads weekend. But equally a lads weekend can be great. It depends what we mean by that. I think we add connotations to phrases. Lads weekend, I think the first thing most people think of is a beer kind of stag do, and that's a narrative that isn't there, but we put in. And I think boys really struggle to know how to be men never mind men who have been men for 60, 70 years, know how to be men actually. They're all just the 19-year-old version of themselves trying to pretend they're their dad, their granddad.
Yeah. But the fact that we had a long conversation before it felt safe for you to start talking about these things in public, that's not okay.
No, but that's it. I was going to say, in the last year, I think 2 or 3 male friends in my kind of age range, so yeah. I was about to say mid-30s, I'm not mid-30s anymore, I just had a birthday, let's just say 30s, have said to me like things that they struggle with about being a man and how they don't feel like they're able to voice it because they don't want people to like accuse them of being sexist or whatever.
Exactly.
So I think it's a common thing. And you think, well, if this is an issue for people in their 30s and 40s,
who are articulate, and
then like no wonder the kids that we're working with are going to be absolutely adrift, and that's why it's so important for us to be able to help them.
I mean, it feels to me as though, you know, and I'm not a man, so all I can do is be an ally. But it feels to me like we've empowered young women and we've supported them to do that. We haven't empowered and supported our young men at the same time, and therefore, rather than bring everybody up, we've kind of lowered the common denominator. So
you go.
So in answer to your question about the issues that are being experienced, we felt that a lot of them were actually being experienced by both young men and young women. But we sort of agreed that I would sort of say what I thought the issues young women were facing. And then, so I peer pressure, I think, is much more powerful than it ever was because of social media and because of all that kind of thing. And for young women, I think it's that pressure to be perfect, to wear the perfect clothes, to have the perfect makeup, the hair, the eyelashes, the fashion, the figure, which is, you know, leading to an uptick in eating disorders and severe mental health disorders. And there's this pressure to succeed, again, I think is greater than it's ever been because of the global nature of it. But what I really want to ask is who's decided what successful looks like? You know, is it being decided by social media? In which case we really need to challenge that. And girls have always been kind of subject to that pressure around their looks and I have to work hard, you know, I have to work doubly as hard to get as far as the men and all that kind of thing. But it's so much worse now. And I think the big change that I've seen is that there's now so much pressure for women to do it alone, to be independent and strong and do it on their own, and I don't need help from anybody, which is incredibly toxic. But I don't know what you feel about young men's.
No, recently there was the Ollie Murs picture of dad bod and fit bod. The Ollie Murs picture, most people would have seen.
No, I didn't see it.
Well,
was it him pre-kids and then after kids?
No, it was him pre being in a film or a music video. Okay. And he said he was a dad bod. And then he had a fit bod, which was, you know, the rip, 6-8 pack abs, all of that. But the problem with it was the dad bod was probably aspirational for most men. Never mind a dad bod. It definitely wasn't a dad bod.
Yeah.
But most people were going, oh, the dad bod's more attractive than the rip 8-pack because it looked more authentic.
Yeah.
But I think there is such an image of men having to look a certain way, you know, to be that muscular, you know, we're not in the 80s, we haven't got Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger as our action heroes, but there is still that strength element that men have as part of them, but suddenly we're now expected to be emotionally intelligent, empathetic, respectful,
as well as a bodybuilder.
Yeah, emotionally literate, understand relationships, understand how our bodies work, understand how our brain works, and we're still trying to figure all that out, and as well as looking like a bodybuilder and being or the strongest or the cleverest or the geekiest or whatever. And, you know, AI is not going to do that for us. And the problem, I think, is we do a lot of work on image for girls, but I don't think we do enough for boys. And certainly boys' image is really hard to know what kind of image you want to be.
I think that's what I meant by we've not raised everybody up. We've just sort of gone, well, you know, when you deal with that, we've been dealing with it for centuries, you get on with it, and that's toxic femininity.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I started to bald at the age of 24, and I shaved my head and was bald since I was 24. But suddenly everybody presumed I was in my mid to late 30s from when I was 24 as a bald man, which for a while helped because it meant I was I was treated in a different way.
Yeah.
But that whole body image of, oh, you haven't got hair, like, you know, there's lots of negative connotations that people don't look past. They just kind of see the facade. And I think sometimes we forget men put on a facade as well.
Yeah.
As who they are, where they are, their company, their audience, as well as who their father figure is. Because actually, for me, masculinity is a lot about father figure. And that's not just biological, that's cultural, that's, you know, who is that kind of role model you have. And society is lacking father figures from celebrities, from the top to the bottom, really. In most homes, I read a statistic earlier, almost 50% of 0 to 14-year-olds no longer live with their biological parents. Like, that's huge.
That's a massive number.
A massive number. And that's not saying that people should be in toxic relationships for the sake of their kids. That is saying that children are losing their biological connections.
And role models.
And their role models. And by and large, I haven't got the percentage, but by and large, children go with mom.
Yeah.
Statistically.
Yeah.
So that means the male role models distilled. And that isn't that they're not being replaced with other really good male role models, because I know a lot of really good male stepdads, etc., etc. But the biological role of the father is played down and down and down, and men need to step up. Like, you know, in my role in education, I've always fulfilled a role of being the dad at school, or the dad in the lesson, or the dad in this environment.
Well, do you know, in the home education community, there was a lot of parents that came to the outdoors group for our home ed forest schools, and several mums said to me, it's because there's male forest school leaders. They're like, so much of the provision for home ed kids is run by women. They were like, that's great. They were like, but our boys need positive role models, and so they would pick our sessions because they knew there were guys running the sessions. And
it's, you know, it's still true, and it has been true for decades, that primary education
is predominantly female.
Female.
Yeah.
And it feels like to me that we've, instead of kind of removing labels, we've actually just added more.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be this or that, or.
So you guys have been in education, I was going to say for over 20 years. I don't want to make that assumption on how old you both are and have been working, but I was trying to do my maths. I reckon that's fair,
That's
right?
fair.
Great.
Yeah, we'll take that.
I was going to say 10, but I was like, it was definitely over 10 years.
Yeah, 20,
So in terms of these issues and the trends, I'm guessing they've always been on your radar, but like, kind of what things have you seen changing? Like, I spoke to a GP recently about girls and eating disorders, and she said it's just skyrocketed. She said, I've got hundreds and hundreds of girls, and she was like, I wouldn't necessarily say they've all got a diagnosed eating disorder. She was like, but they've all got disordered eating, and she was talking about how much worse it's got in the last 5 years.
It feels to me that the cases of it for girls, it's self-harm, it is eating disorders, it's isolation and anxiety. I think isolation and anxiety are true for young men as well.
Yeah.
But you know, if you look at the burnout and suicide rates for young men, it's
really
massive,
appalling.
Yeah.
And so it feels like it's kind of manifesting in quite a gender diverse way, but that doesn't mean that, you know, young women are doing those things.
A lot of it's about family, isn't it? And, you know, the statement, it takes a village to raise a child, was true when we lived in communities, and I don't think we live in communities anymore. I think we live in isolation, which is what Robyn indicated.
Yeah.
You know, and why eating disorders are on the rise is we don't sit around a dining room table and eat home cooked food. We eat on our laps, or we eat on our own,
or in the car,
or we snatch food and eat it during a meeting. A, it's not healthy. B, it's not practical. And C, eating used to be a communal event. It used to be an activity that you did with your friends or family. Now it's almost seen as a burden or a hassle or a must. And, you know, there are really good nutritional drinks out there now that replace food as a need.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying is wrong,
No,
but
the
it does remove
need,
but it does remove the community and the connection.
Social,
So no wonder food anxiety is on the rise, because nobody really knows what's even in our food. So anxiety of what I'm eating. Fast food, like it's not great food we're eating fast-wise.
But again, you've got to look to the economy as that as well, because healthy food is expensive.
Yeah.
Really
You know,
expensive.
so there's all these kind of things, but we don't want to say that the family is the most important thing. It's the community.
Yeah,
Whether
yeah,
that
yeah.
happens.
Well, it's the village, isn't it? What is our village? And that could be if you're in central London, leafy Devon, or the Birmingham kind of city. What is your village? Who is around you that helps you raise yourself as well as your children? Because it isn't just your immediate family, although it might be. It could be your friends. It could be your neighbour. It could be the community groups you're involved in, be that forest school or be it home ed groups or be it a school community.
Yeah.
But there are still those gender divides around. It's getting better because a lot of men are stepping up, but those gender divides around. It's okay to ask for help, you know, and women tending to ask for help more, perhaps crying more, reaching out and communicating more, and it's still a stereotype that that's not manly to do that. And there are, there's Andy's group, there's loads of groups out there, which is fantastic, but that's where I really feel strongly that as women we need to step up and ally with this and help.
A conversation we had was around, we've removed crying from weakness. They are different. You can cry and not be weak.
Still not for a lot of men, I think,
Not
particularly
for a lot
of
of-
our
yeah.
But it's
generation.
really difficult to cry as a man. And, I openly cry in front of my girls. Probably too much nowadays, to be honest. And sometimes an advert can set me off, so forgive me. But, I definitely grew up thinking weakness was crying. And almost went on the attack because I've got 4 daughters and I want to model that I can be an emotionally intelligent human being. But what we haven't done is remove other negatives. So crying doesn't equal weakness. Anger doesn't equal violence, but I think it does.
But we haven't addressed that one.
No, we
Yeah.
haven't. And
Yeah.
and actually anger creates change. Most movements come out of anger.
Yeah.
Rosa Parks didn't sit on her seat on the bus. She was angry.
Yeah.
Didn't mean she was violent, but she was angry, and that created change.
But also anger is a necessary emotion because it tells us that our boundaries are about to be crossed or have crossed and that we need to act.
Yeah. We need
But
to
we're
do
not.
something.
We see that with women, but we still automatically associate anger with aggression and violence when it comes to men.
Yeah.
And that's...
Although I think there's also judgment made about women who are angry as well, bossy.
Exactly,
and
yeah, the difference between
ballbusters and all that
assertive
stuff.
and
Yeah.
But I also we can't avoid. I know everybody goes banging on about it, but we cannot avoid talking about social media and the impact of fake news. And it goes back to what I was saying about who's decided that to be attractive you have to have a ponytail and false eyelashes, and pouty lips, or whatever it is, or a 6-pack, or whatever. Somehow we've let something else tell us what success looks like.
Yeah.
And I'd like to follow the Finland and Denmark have introduced into their curriculum mandatory how to recognise fake news.
Yeah.
Let's be doing that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it openly, because I think that's all we can do.
I think the rise of fake news is massive, and the rise of fake anything is huge. AI is going to change the way we see anything that's real.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my girls and Sarah, my wife, about a code statement that we would make with each other, that if they phoned me and there was a real problem, they would make that statement.
Yeah.
But for that to happen, we'd have to leave all technology behind and go for a walk in the woods without our smartwatches, smartphones, smart anything, so that we all knew that word, because technically we're always being listened to by AI.
I heard a story recently about a woman who received a video message from her daughter, and it was her daughter saying, "Mum, I've lost my phone, lost my wallet. This woman's let me borrow her phone. Can you send them money for the train?" And she sent the money. I don't think it was very much. Daughter comes home 30 seconds later, and she's like, "What on earth?" And she hadn't lost anything. That's insane.
That's a really common
there's
scam at the
technology.
moment.
But I've heard about the texts and the phone calls, but to actually have a video of your child talking to you is really scary.
And that technology is at your fingertips for free now. And that's where technology is with us Luddites really, because we're techie sav, but we're not, we're not tech geniuses. We can't code.
And the problem in schools is that the teenagers are going to be so far ahead of the teachers.
Yeah.
But that's kind of gone off the...
I was going to say, we have gone off topic
we've gone
slightly.
off.
Let's go back. I was talking about whether things have changed, which we obviously they have. But what sort of influences we've just said about social media, but any other influences that kind of these young men and women are facing in regards to these issues?
Well, I think it's this success defined by something else, and the peer pressure to conform to that perfect whatever it is, So for women, obviously, it's about the way they look, the way they dress, all that kind of thing. But the thing that for me has changed is the kind of, and there's nothing wrong with it as such, but a lot of media and things around women has got very aggressive about, have this straw so that if your drink's been spiked, and looking after yourself, and if you're in trouble, approach a middle-aged woman and say mum, and they'll help you.
Yeah.
It's got an aggressive tone about it somehow, and lots of people are saying, we should be teaching men not to behave like that instead of teaching girls how to
protect themselves. Yeah.
But that's where you get into this controversial. Well, it's not all men. Yeah, but I'm walking down the street. I spoke to somebody yesterday, and he said, I will actively cross the street because I'm aware that even though I'm not like that, I actually present a threat.
Well,
and that to me is what makes I feel is making males feel that they can't talk about this or address it.
Well, if I go for a run early in the morning or later in the evening, and I'm running along the promenade of the seafront, and there's a lady walking in front of me the same direction, I will almost go into the road or across the road, because the last thing I want her to hear is a man running up behind her, even though I'm just going about my run.
It's so difficult though, isn't it? Because there was a comedian who did a skit, and she said, man and woman go on a date, the woman might be afraid that he's going to kill her, the man's going to be afraid that she laughs at him or takes the mick out of him. And it's like, when you look at the stats of how much violence women... that's really poorly worded, but the statistics of how many women have had, an abusive situation or been harassed or, been sexually assaulted, it is really high. And so, but we know, as you said, it's not all men, but it's enough.
But it's real.
That there is an issue that needs to be resolved. So then we need to look
but what
at,
we haven't done is given our young men the tools to help be part of that resolution. Because it needs to be it needs to be resolved together. And it doesn't. If you as a older, articulate, educated man don't feel you can even have these conversations, then how will we resolve that? Because it is real. I'm not. It is real. There's no two ways about it, and I'm not playing that down at all. But the solution has to be a joint one. It's not going to be. Women might feel safer, but it's not going to be resolved purely by women.
No, because the boys that we're raising need to know not to act like that,
but also that the boys that we've already raised need to know how to role model this and how to talk about this without feeling that they're going to be shouted out or shouted down or it's a hugely tricky one.
I think there's nobody really ambassadoring for boys. Is my biggest issue.
And that's
which is where Andrew Tate steps in, because...
Can we just very quickly, I'm sure that everyone listening has heard of Andrew Tate, but in case they haven't, just quickly explain.
So Andrew Tate is a self-professed misogynist who leads a whole group of negative male role model types in regards to how women should be treated, and how men are the kind of alphas and women should be obedient and follow in his wake, really.
And if men are isolated or alone, it's the woman's fault.
Yeah, and whilst he's not like the leader of Incel and all of those kind of other male groups, they're quite adjacent to him, and he speaks powerfully.
He's not discouraging it.
No, and actually some of what he says are things that men will buy into, because it's about, there is a gap that men don't speak up, and there is a gap that men need to be united in a sense. But what he then does is attach lots of toxicity to that and points the blame at women, as opposed to actually going, as men we need to step up and work together.
It's almost the same as radicalisation.
Oh, it's hugely.
This description fits most of the
Yeah.
You know, model.
Well, actually, now when you do prevent, and it gives you the two examples, one of the examples is boys that have been radicalised, isn't it?
But I think there's a crisis for boys and young men around where they fit in society, and
there's so many
and men like myself are scared to speak up because we're worried we will be tarnished with toxic masculinity by speaking into a space that we're just a bit unsure about how that looks. And in March of this year, there was a report published by the Centre of Justice in the UK, and it was a report released in March of this year, and it talks about the crisis in young men and boys in this country but across the world, and the statistics are damning when you look at the age of 16 to 24-year-old males, the decline in society, in job aspects, in even leaving home at a sensible age. Like, boys are living at home longer. And that's about that isolation, that lack of worth, that lack of identity.
Which is exactly where women were 50 years ago. I'm not again, not saying for 1 minute that equality has been achieved. I'm not saying that. Yeah. But...
Well, we talk a lot about the pendulum.
Yeah.
And in my view, the pendulum is swinging. And in some places... As it needed to. But in some places it has swung too far. And we have a lot of really good ambassadors for women, but we don't have many ambassadors for men.
Which has allowed the likes of Andrew Tate to step into
that after Adolescence came out, again, maybe I'll do a quick thing. That was a Netflix show. I don't know how you'd explain it really quickly.
I haven't seen it.
So I think Adolescence was a really interesting 4 episodes talking about a young boy who grew up in what most people would say is a normal family. I'm doing speech marks, you can't see. And he ended up murdering someone.
Essentially because he had a crush on her and she'd rejected him.
Yeah, but there's a lot of sub-narratives in that because actually that talks about incels and toxic masculinity, where actually when you watch the programme, she was accusing him of things and bullying him in many ways for being something he perhaps wasn't. Yeah. But,
and there was a real undertone of his parents going, we should have opened the door and talked to him. He just came home from school and shut himself away.
But how many of our kids sit on technology and don't talk? But that
that
whole voice.
Before technology came to shut my door.
And his dad, in the last episode, his dad really shows his vulnerability of going, I tried to be the opposite of what my dad was for me, but in the absence of doing some of the cheering me on things that I didn't want to do because my dad was toxic in it, I didn't do it for him, so I didn't champion him.
But what I was going to say was, after that, I saw someone produced, they were like, right, okay, and they said exactly how they said, there's no role models for men. And someone produced a list of, like, these are brilliant male speakers that your teenage boys might not want to watch. But I hadn't heard of any of them. So I was like, these are all, like, maybe they'll gain more traction now, but, like, these apparently guys are doing some great work, but no one's really heard of them.
And that's what I mean about, we need, as women, we've talked about how I can ally with you to support our young men and do something really active in our school, because we have a unique opportunity to bring this up and to have these conversations while we're in the woods and support that, but also supporting, we are largely male learners, but we do have female learners, and getting this solution together feels like we have a unique opportunity that we need to take.
And you're right, there are a lot of good men out there. There are. Absolutely are. But I don't think it's, there are, I'm going to use the word, there are policies out there that actively encourage places to be more female aware, more gender aware, more gentle in certain approaches, which is really important and really needed. But it does. But there's an absence of where we support men in that, and there's taking men on that journey as opposed to just going, well, your grandparent or your dad's view is actually toxic because they don't know any different. There's a inherited. The world's moved on and changed so much, we haven't taken boys on that journey. And education is really feminine.
Yeah.
In nursery, most of the adults are female. In primary, most of the adults are female. There's a few men, but not many.
And they tend to be in senior leadership positions rather than delivery staff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then if you look at secondary, a lot of secondary is mixed. Probably still heavier on the female. But when you look at the curriculum, which is their learning, very feminine in its style. And, we talked about English this morning.
Yeah.
And, Robyn can talk about that much more eloquently as an English specialist. But English is taught in such a feminine way. It's really difficult for boys to engage with.
So my concrete example is that they've taken Mice and Men off the syllabus and replaced it with Jane Austen.
Okay.
Which, don't get me wrong, Jane Austen's great.
Yeah.
But do we seriously expect our
teenage boys
to engage with that? Whereas Mice and Men was fantastic.
Yeah.
Lots of moral, ethical dilemmas and conversations, and same as Lord of the Flies. I don't think they've taken that off yet, but for me, replacing Mice and Men with Jane Austen is just we are close to positive discrimination, which is never successful.
So I think let's move on, because we've talked quite a lot about what the problems are for people of all ages, but let's talk about what we can do. So what are we doing at the outdoor school to talk about these issues and to work with our learners to empower them and kind of equip them with the skills and the knowledge and the language and the confidence and all those things that they need within the context of what we've been talking about today.
So some of the concrete things we're doing, we have a champion to support women's health and women's issues that staff and line managers can use. We are training. We are close to launching a men's support champion as well within our company. As far as the learners are concerned, we talk a lot about mental health. We talk about overtly about friendships and relationships and, to say, one of the things that I want us to do is to look at, following Denmark and Finland down the, let's do a really overt teaching block in PHSE about peer pressure from social media, the fake news. I used to teach media studies, and I think everybody should be forced to take a year of media studies, because the media is in our homes and in our lives often uninvited, and we don't teach children to question the message they're being given. So as an older woman, which is all I'm prepared to say, every time there's a skincare advert, it's telling me, any advert needs you to need the product. So it's telling me that my face should not show any wrinkles, shouldn't show any signs of age, and before you know it, you're believing that and thinking, oh God, I better do something about it. But we're not questioning the premise. Why shouldn't my face show the fact that I'm older than most? And it's the same for any product. You know, you see a spot cream for teenagers. It's all about, you're not attractive to the opposite sex if you've got spots. Well, hang on. If I've got spots, yes, I'm going to treat them. But that premise is wrong. If we don't teach children to question the messages that they're getting, so we need to do more of that. But we need to overtly support our young men in the same way that we support our young women. We need to ally to find a common solution. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
I think you're right. And what you said, without kind of outlining, is we start with the staff. Like, we make sure that our staff treat each other equally, be that male, female, by identifiers. We are treated equally as human beings, first and foremost. And for me, that then gets modelled to our learners, that we are treated as unique individuals, as human beings, not because you're a boy or not because you're a girl or not because you've got no hair or because you've got pink hair. You are an individual that is celebrated for being an individual, which then means that they can be free to be who they are. Like,
tolerance.
We're a special needs school, so ultimately all of our children have seen challenges throughout their learning journey until they've got to us, And they still see those challenges within their home or community settings. So what we try to do is remove their differences by their uniqueness and actually celebrate it. You know, so many schools have inclusion units, which are more exclusion units than inclusion, where we are so inclusive by celebrating the individual. It does and it doesn't matter about their gender in equal balance.
I think
do you have? Oh, sorry.
So I think it's important to note, you know, things like, so we really try to avoid the gender stereotypes, because all of our staff, whether they're male or female, they can all take part in price in helping to, you know, positively hold a child if necessary. I've worked in schools where, I mean, they literally refer to the behaviour team as the heavy mob.
Yeah.
And if you called for support, you got 5 burly rugby types came barreling through the door and sorted it all out, and you stood back out of the way. The fact that we don't do that, but we also do it the other way, in that, you know, often you will see 2 female staff holding a learner. I get told off using the word holding, but, you know, doing that. And it will be the male who then goes off and does the right, come on, you know, what's going on kind of thing. So we try to avoid that, and we try to avoid boys seeing the men coming to fix it, and the women doing the lovey cuddly stuff. So I think we're good at that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we proactively talk about positive touch. You know, if a child is upset, our staff are encouraged to give them a hug and allow them to feel safe in their environment. And
it isn't just the female staff that do that.
No, and it's really important that we all talk about how we feel, be that we're feeling overly one way or the other in regards to who we are as human beings, and we try to model that practice, because we're all different. Boys and girls are different, and that's okay. But so is one boy next to the next boy, and so is one girl next to the next girl. And it isn't because they look in a certain way or because they're a certain type of breed. You know, we're human beings first and foremost, and the gender imbalance or whatever society are trying to put on them is being put on them, not created by them.
And we need to enable them to fight that.
Absolutely. 2 children born aren't coming with a knowledge of this is what I have to be. They learn to be what they watch, what they experience, and that's why I started with community, because how do human beings know how to behave? You learn it all in your first 1001 days, which is when your subconscious form is created, and that's how you know how to communicate, how to show respect, how to demonstrate respect, and that's hard to change when you've already been in a place of difficulty, be that in your home or your community, whatever your community is. Your community could be online. So, you know, the rise of online challenges and fake news, as Robyn indicated, unless people know what truth is and know where safety is, how can we expect anything from them unless we're putting that in? So that's what we try to do in the outdoor school. We have them in a woodland setting, generally, in an outdoor setting where it's not walls and a roof so that they feel caged in. They're in an environment where we do check in, where they can talk about how they feel and how they might demonstrate that, and that they need to run around and get rid of some energy before they can sit and explain that, or be that they just want to sit there because they're cold or sad or whatever. We address the individual as an individual rather than, oh, you're a boy, you need to go and run around, and you're a girl, so you're going to sit here and be creative.
But what we also do actively, I think, though, is we don't avoid celebrating a strength that is gender stereotypical.
Yeah.
So, for example, we do it all the time. You know, somebody, you know, hands up, I am not very good at figures, and that is quite a female stereotype. But I have no problem saying, yeah, go and talk to John.
Yeah.
You know, and vice versa. But we also demonstrate that we can do the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, we call it bad cop, good cop sometimes, don't we?
Yeah.
That I can do that and you can be the other. So trying to celebrate people for their strengths, even if they are gender stereotypical, you know, and most people know that my son works for the company. He's 6'5". I'm not going to pretend I'm stronger than him. That's just ridiculous. But I'm not going to shame him for that, and I'm not going to assume that he's going to be violent or aggressive because he's big. But that is still very much out there. You know, a lot of men will tell you, if they happen to be the tallest or the strongest looking in the pub, there's always another man looking to take them down. And then that's kind of perpetrates the male equals anger equals violence. But we've got to deal with those stereotypes and expectations, and we can only do that with our learners by talking about it.
I was about to say, do you find that there? I mean, obviously not you two because you're not really doing much delivery stuff, but like, do you know if like the people who are on the ground with the kids are having explicit conversations about these issues, about eating disorders and Andrew Tate and stuff like?
So and I think it deliberately is about becoming a lifelong learner. That is our whole approach. And the need to be a lifelong learner is so that you can continually know how to adapt your skills, your knowledge on your environment. So the rise of challenges that men face and leads to toxic masculinity in some ways is about knowing how to communicate. So actually a lot of our drive in our school is about how you communicate well, effectively. Be that verbally or non-verbal communication. We explicitly do that with our kids. And we do talk, you know, we eat together wherever possible because again that creates community. We talk about our feelings, be that if we have a dysregulation or if we have a event that's a challenge, we will openly talk about it when they're ready. We'll talk with the individual when they're not ready, but we will openly talk about it because actually what we're doing is modelling how to fall out well, you know.
And our staff are encouraged to challenge racist, homophobic, misogynistic, you know, opinions that often, with the best one in the world, learners are bringing from outside. And staff are encouraged to go, well, right, hang on, stop, but wait a minute, we're not, I know we're doing this activity, but let's talk about that. You know, so I think staff are very good at that. And they're also very good at calling each other out in appropriate ways in front of children. You know, so saying, well, I'm not sure you should have, you know, said that. And they'll talk about it in front of the children, which, you know, I think that's the most powerful thing we can do is to teach tolerance. And actually, so a lot of our learners, especially the older ones that we've had for a little while, are quite good at, if somebody's saying, you know, I'm really grumpy today, and our other learners in their group are really good at going, right, well, I won't say that to you, or I won't do this to you, or maybe today's not the day for me to play a prank on you. And they actually get, the older learners that we've had a long time are beginning to get really good at that, of kind of understanding how the other person's feeling and how that needs to affect their behaviour, which again I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, if we could do that more in society.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
I mean, it comes down to tolerance, really. You know, just understanding that the other person today is not the day to play polite with them.
And teaching our boys how to celebrate each other as well as celebrate girls appropriately. Like, I think society really doesn't do enough about that, and actually what we do actively is we celebrate each other as individuals, and we recognise that what's going on, and you know we've started that kind of journey into menopause and menstruation, and we're doing that with staff, but we'll do that with our kids as well, because actually a lot of boys never learn about menstruation.
They learn the biology, they don't learn the psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. As a male at school, when I was a child, I did not learn about the menopause and I didn't learn about menstruation. And maybe that's because of the years I was brought up in school, but we teach about the biology, but we don't teach about the impact that has on females' bodies. So, and
the same is true, you know, they're going to have mothers going through menopause.
Knowledge and information is key, and boys need to know that so that they can understand it.
They can't be tolerant if they don't understand it.
Absolutely. Well, you mock things you don't understand, and toxic masculinity is quite often that stereotype of men mocking things about whoever. But if we enable them to understand.
But we need to do the same thing, because girls will, you know, like you say, men are so afraid of being ridiculed by women. well, we got to stop doing that as well.
Yeah.
And understand their emotional.
Well, I think we've moved away from sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think that's an archaic statement.
Yeah.
But just in case anybody who listens to a podcast still thinks that, it's absolute tosh. Words, a smirk can hurt more than sticks and stones, depending on how I'm feeling, actually. And the words, our words are the most powerful weapon we have. And be that we, if somebody laughs at you, it's so hurtful. And I think,
hard to do.
yeah. And you know, I'm not scared of many things at all. It's just I don't have many phobias. But being alone is a massive fear of mine, if I was being really honest and vulnerable. Because I don't like being alone. I find it terrifying.
Yeah, and I've dealt with personal situations where I have relied on the men around me to stay strong in an incredibly difficult situation without any thought for what I'm asking, what the impact of that is, because they probably want to fall apart just as much as I did.
Yeah.
But somehow it's their role, you know, so it's understanding and tolerance is what it comes down to. And just the fact that then there's a need for a lost boys report.
Yeah.
Just the fact that exists tells us where we are.
So what changes would you like to see? What hopes do you guys have for these learners that we're working with?
Well, I want to make
generation.
people. I want to make people less victims of pressure to be something. You know, have the tools and the strength and the allies to just go. No, I'm not going to be pressured into being that just because you think that's successful. I think it's this, and I'm happy doing that. I do think we've got to empower our young men and support them like we have and still continue to need to do with our young women. I'm not saying that's solved, but yeah, my main thing is giving the tools to not be made into something by pressure from friends, from social media, from it's just the strength and the confidence to just be who you are.
Yeah.
You know, and we can only teach that by role modelling, really, talking about it.
Yeah, I think giving all of our learners and staff the ability to align and ambassador for, as well as against, anything that's toxic. Like, I think that would be that we want each individual to be a member of society that build each other up and not knock each other down. And that does include calling each other out, because if you don't know a behaviour is not okay, you will carry on doing that behaviour. So
and rail against the reaction that you get for that.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what happens. So I think if we can enable everyone to not walk past something that they wouldn't accept, well, then we're going to change society one starfish at a time, one person at a time. Because actually, if we say the problem is too big for us to address, then nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, it will just get worse, actually. Yeah.
So before we start to close up, any practical tips for any parents or educators listening who kind of are thinking, I want to be doing more with young people in my life?
For me, it's talk about it. Just be open about it. Discuss it. Challenge it. I mean, my upbringing was for children to be seen and not heard, and I made a conscious effort. If I'd snapped at one of the kids, I would then calm down and go and say, look, I shouldn't have snapped at you. It was because of this. I'm grumpy because of that. And kind of explained, not to say so it's okay, but to say, look, this is how Mummy was feeling. She shouted at you. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. We can do the same thing with these kind of cultures. Yeah. So, you know, if you know, children obviously of an appropriate age, but, you know, if somebody says something, challenge it, but talk about it in front of the children. Kind of go, well, you know, this has made me feel, did you mean, you know, and talk about it. And then one of the things that I'm actively doing is reaching out, upskilling myself. So I'm reaching out to some of these very, very good male role models that are around, reaching out to them so that I can learn how to ally with and what I can do to actively help. But it's getting it in the open and teaching children to tolerate it. If they see Mum says something that puts Dad down and Dad kind of gently goes, that's not okay, and they talk it through and they fall out well, and the children see, oh, you know,
Healthy
because that could have been a row,
conversation. Yeah,
rather
yeah, yeah.
than, mum and dad are okay, and that was interesting
Yeah.
kind of thing. Or the other way around, women putting their male partners down, or sons or uncles, it doesn't matter. But let's just be open.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk about it.
I think it's really important. And what you just described is, I have friends who say, oh, my parents never fell out. Well, your parents probably never communicated then, or they fell out, or they fell out behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And actually, we should model to our own children as well as to others how we fall out well. And that doesn't mean moaning about our friends and loved ones to our children, because they pick up on it. And that's not good practice.
Can set for I'm being stereotypical here, but for a man to say to a woman, do you realise what you just said has made me feel like this?
Yeah.
It's quite uncommon.
Yeah.
And it would help the female understanding, because they go, oh no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
And then the children see, oh, it's okay to tell someone they've upset me.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's really subtle and vague, but it just got to get out in the open.
Yeah.
And I think it's that slight change, isn't it? Instead of what you said made me feel this way, what I heard was...
Yeah.
And actually that little subtle change doesn't mean they said it, but that's how you heard it.
Yeah.
Gives them the ability to then adjust
creating a narrative around what somebody does or says.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think it's really important that we open up the conversation and admit we don't know it all. Like we say that to our kids, let's learn together.
Let's show vulnerability.
None of us are experts, because if we were, the world would be a bit of a better place, probably.
Is there anything else you guys want to say about this topic we haven't covered?
I think we could talk about it forever, but I think we've sort of covered most things.
I'm really glad that you
gave us
the opportunity to talk about it, and I think it's really helpful to have a balance of voice, so male and female talking about it, because naturally when you talk about toxic masculinity, you probably would have female heavy voice on that, but unfortunately if you're not careful you create a narrative by who you have talking about it. So actually I joked with Robyn before it and said, I really hope I don't come across as the toxic masculinity expert, because that's certainly not what I want to be. But it's really important that there's a balance, because actually it is a human issue, not a woman issue or a man issue. It is a humanity issue that we have toxicity in any of it.
Sometimes when men say, again, not all men, but I have had men say to me, well, I'm not a feminist, I'm not a woman. And I was like, that's not how it works. Like, feminism affects both genders, it affects everyone.
We hold up half the sky, don't we? But I forgot what I was going to say now. No idea. But I hope nobody feels, and I hope that you don't feel patronised by my saying I want to ally with, like I'm this wonderful person who can help. That's not what I mean. I mean we've got to move towards a jointly arrived at solution.
Well, I think it adds power to, in our setting, Robyn is known as being a strong ambassador for women, and that's really important. And I think it's really important that she's also known for being a strong ally to men, because otherwise it drives division, not creates unity. And I want to be a strong ambassador for men, but I think if you put that in isolation, it almost sounds like I'm being toxic masculinity, where it's complete tosh. Like, I want to be a strong ambassador for men and aligned with women. I think that's really important, and actually the two of us are in key positions of responsibility, accountability, visibility, leadership. If we are accidental in how we communicate, our words have power. So we have to be intentional on our vision and mission to enable individuals to be better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
No, I think it's been great, and it's been really interesting to hear the two of you bounce off of each other on it as well. So that's been really good to have that kind of balance as well. So thank you for your time today, guys.
Thank you.
I know you're both super busy. I ask everyone 3 questions to end, but you've both been on the podcast before, but I still like to end it with something like slightly softer. So we're still going to go for it. So tell me what you're reading or listening to right now.
Ooh. I'm reading something called The Way Out, which is about neuroplasticity in the brain around pain, which is really interesting. But I'm also reading something called Keys to the Kingdom, and I'm also reading some fairy fantasy. So a nice range. Not quite smart,
You're
but
not
some fantasy
on the
novels.
podcast anyway,
Yes.
Not that you admit, absolutely.
What about you, John?
So a good book that I'm reading at the moment is Boys Do Cry. It's about improving boys' mental health, and that's written by Matt Pinkett, who's a teacher and educator. He wrote Boys Don't Try, he wrote, which is how education challenges boys. But Boys Do Cry is a really good book around boys' mental health.
Nice.
So I definitely recommend that. And listening, I am listening to lots about AI because I find it fascinating at the moment, and I'm trying to upskill myself because I don't know enough. But I'm finding the paradox, as I mentioned in the last podcast, of it being a superpower and a super terrifying force really interesting.
Excellent. And anything, I said outdoorsy goal, or just something you're looking forward to this summer or this year?
First on that one.
Something I'm looking forward to this year. I am looking forward to... looking forward to going on holiday with my girls. I currently have a daughter doing A-levels and I have a daughter doing GCSEs. Both did maths, GCSE and A-level today. So I'm looking forward to exam season ending because that's been a joy in our household.
What about you, Robyn?
I'm looking for... I have a large birthday this year. So I am... I'm going to say this
21
positively.
again.
I'm entering my crone phase and all the power that brings. And I booked a trip to Nashville and New Orleans to celebrate
exciting.
that. And I'm considering buying a camper van, so I'm going to hire one for a couple of weekends and go away and see how I get on.
Nice. Very exciting. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today,
Well, thank you
guys.
for the opportunity, as we said.
No, you're very welcome.
I hope we haven't caused too much controversy.
No, I'm sure you're all good. Thanks, guys. A massive thank you to Robyn and to John for joining us for this conversation today. I found it to be really interesting and thought-provoking. I hope that those of you listening also enjoyed listening to the conversation and might have found it useful or challenging or gave you food for thought. If you did, as always, we'd love it if you would rate the podcast, like it, subscribe to it, share it with your friends, do all the things that mean that more people will find us. We'll be back in a fortnight with our final episode of the season, but until then, thanks for listening.